The scream that tore out of me wasn't dignified, but grief rarely is in America. Maybe that is why when I first saw the silver SUV squatting on my daughter's grave like some monstrous insult, I burst into a laugh so sharp it cracked into a sob. It didn't even look real. It looked like a bad joke, like the kind of thing you would expect to see in a skit about entitled suburban moms. Except this time it was my life, my loss, my little girl beneath the wheels. I remember thinking, "You cannot possibly be serious, lady," before I even saw her face. But then she stepped out. HOA Karen. The name I would repeat so many times in the months and years that followed that it became a kind of curse in my mouth. She wore oversized sunglasses even though the morning sun was low, her hair sprayed into an immaculate fan of golden stiffness, the kind that looks too delicate to survive an honest breeze. When she slammed the door shut, she did it with the confidence of someone who believed with absolute certainty that the world existed to accommodate her. I stood there frozen, fingers numb despite the warm spring air of Tacoma, Washington. The cemetery was quiet except for the hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of birds settling in the branches. My daughter's grave sat under a maple tree, a place she used to hide beneath when she was alive, pretending she could talk to the ants. I had chosen that spot because it felt like somewhere she'd want to rest. And that woman had her car on top of it. When she noticed me staring, she tilted her sunglasses down slightly, as if giving me permission to speak. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked with a tone that suggested I was inconveniencing her by existing. I walked forward slowly, like approaching something fragile that might shatter or explode. My voice came out hoarse. "You are parked on my daughter's grave." She blinked once, then twice, then shrugged like she had misplaced a grocery list. "Well, there was no parking space," she said, "and I'm only going to be a minute. The maintenance people said the front gate area is off limits today, so I had no choice." No choice. As if the entire cemetery were a strip mall and she had found the last free spot at Costco. I felt a heat rise from my stomach to my throat. "Lady, this is a cemetery, not a parking lot. You cannot just drive up on people's graves." She waved one dismissive hand, jangling a charm bracelet. People are so sensitive these days. No wonder this country's falling apart. I stared at her, stunned silence filling my chest with pressure, like a balloon about to burst. A part of me was waiting for a hidden camera crew to pop out. Surely no one is actually like this. But her makeup was too precise, her posture too rigid, her entitlement too casual. This wasn't a joke. This was her version of reality. My daughter's reality, however, had ended 2 years earlier in a hit and run. I felt my fingers tremble. "Move your car," I said. "Please." She raised an eyebrow. I said, "I'll only be a minute." "You're being dramatic." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in the violent sense people imagine. More like a tear along the edge of a paper you've folded too many times. Something fragile inside me gave way. The grief that had been folded, tucked, hidden, managed with careful breaths and measured routines ripped wide open. I stepped closer. "Move your car," she scoffed. "You know what, sir, you should really calm down. I'm sure your daughter wouldn't want you making a scene like this. People grieve differently, but..." She kept talking, but I didn't hear the rest. My ears filled with that high ringing sound, the kind that feels like standing too close to fireworks. The world around me blurred for a second, and only her voice, smooth and superior and oblivious, cut through. My daughter's name was Lily. I wanted to shout. She had freckles across her nose and hated math, but loved worms. She was 9 and thought she was immortal. How dare you talk about making a scene on her grave when your SUV is literally sitting on top of her bones? But the words wouldn't come out clean. They came out in fragments. "You don't get to say her name." She rolled her eyes. "Wow. Okay. This is ridiculous. I'll be done when I'm done. Go cool off." She turned toward the cemetery office, heels clacking against the pavement. I stared at the tires sitting inches above the patch of earth where Lily's little ballet slippers were buried with her. For a long moment, I could not move. A couple nearby had stopped to watch. An older man shook his head and muttered something about people these days. But nobody stepped in. Karen culture was alive and thriving, after all. When she finally came out of the office and saw me still standing there, she sighed dramatically. "You again." She walked to the car. "Fine, if it means that much to you, I'll move it, but you really need therapy." She jabbed the remote, and the SUV beeped. Then, with her perfectly manicured hand, She shoved me slightly aside to open the passenger door. It wasn't enough to cause injury, but it was enough to ignite outrage. "You put your hands on me," I whispered. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes again. "Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. The word echoed like a taunt in the hollow of my chest. She drove off the grave as casually as if she were backing out of a Starbucks drive-thru. Dirt crumbled beneath her tires. The ground sagged. I flinched. I knelt beside Lily's grave, touching the disturbed soil. My hands shook. The anger inside me burned like something radioactive. I wasn't a violent man. I wasn't even confrontational before all this. But grief rewrites you. It sands you down, hollows you out, fills you with a quiet ferocity to protect the memory of what you've lost. And she had stomped on that memory like it meant nothing. I didn't know then that this moment, this morning under the maple tree, would spiral into one of the most publicly discussed court cases in Washington state that year. I didn't know it would lead to petitions, televised hearings, online debates, and eventually the 8-year sentence that would shock even the prosecutors. All I knew was that something had to be done. Something bigger than a complaint form or an angry Yelp review. Because people like her didn't learn from polite correction. They learned only when the consequences finally outweighed the arrogance. And so began the long unraveling. 3 days later, I found out she had posted a video online. A shaky clip of me standing by Lily's grave, voice cracking, eyes glassy. She had filmed me without my consent. The caption read, "Overly emotional man loses it in public because I parked for literally 5 minutes." People are so dramatic these days. The comments section was a battlefield. Some people defended her. Others dragged her. Someone recognized the cemetery. Someone else recognized the grave. And then people realized a 9-year-old child had died beneath that maple tree. The internet turned. Within 48 hours, the video hit local news. Reporters showed up. The cemetery director issued an apology. Karen issued none. Instead, she made another video. This one worse. She laughed. Actually laughed. Talking about how ridiculous it was that a grown man couldn't handle something as small as a parking inconvenience. She said maybe if parents watched their kids better, accidents wouldn't happen. That was the moment the hate toward her turned nuclear. That was when I contacted a lawyer. Not for defamation. Not for emotional harm, though my therapist insisted I should. Not even for trespassing. But for something far more serious that emerged as witnesses came forward. Because apparently, that morning at the cemetery was not her first offense, nor her worst. And what we found out next would shake everything open. The discovery began with a voicemail left on my lawyer's phone at 2:13 in the morning. A woman's voice, trembling and exhausted, whispered, "I saw her do it too. I saw her do something awful. I've been waiting for someone else to come forward because no one ever believes me. Please call me back." Her name was Meredith Clark, a hospice nurse who worked less than a mile from the cemetery. 2 years earlier, she had encountered a Karen in a confrontation that, from her telling, sounded like the prelude to something unhinged. Her story unfolded slowly, like peeling back damp paper. Meredith had been supervising the driveway at the hospice center when a minivan, unable to find street parking, attempted to pull into the staff loading zone. She approached it politely. The driver complied and moved without argument. It should have ended there. But then Karen arrived. She drove her silver SUV into that same loading zone, rolled down the window half an inch, and snapped, "I'm picking up medical supplies. Move." When Meredith explained the rule calmly, Karen exploded. Not just a raised voice, but a tirade that echoed across the building entrance. "You're all incompetent. My tax money pays your salary. Who even are you to tell me where I can park?" When Meredith asked her to leave, Karen stepped out of the car, got inches from her face, and muttered slowly, "You have no idea who you're dealing with. If I wanted to, I could make your life a nightmare. All it takes is one phone call." It escalated. She shoved past Meredith, stormed into the hospice lobby, and began recording the staff without permission. She accused them of elder neglect, shouted that the hallways smelled like negligence, demanded the administrator be fired, and refused to leave until security physically escorted her outside. The incident was reported, but nothing happened. She was issued a warning and released with a citation that amounted to a parking ticket. Meredith's voice cracked as she told us, "I thought that was the end of it. But then, 2 weeks later, someone slashed my tires. And I'm not saying I know it was her. But she had looked me dead in the eyes that day and said she'd make my life miserable. My lawyer asked her why she never filed a further complaint. Because no one believes women like me when we talk about women like her, she said. They think we're exaggerating. I understood. I had been dismissed too. That voicemail pushed everything into motion. My lawyer, a calm and brilliant woman named Celeste, combed through every public record connected to Karen. Parking disputes, HOA conflicts, school board screaming matches, videos of her berating fast food workers, police reports filed by neighbors about noise complaints, aggressive confrontations, even an accusation of her threatening to run over a mailbox because it was too close to her driveway. Still, petty cruelty is not a felony. But something else was. It came from a teenage boy named Gabriel, who nervously wrung his hands as he sat across from us at Celeste's office. His mother sat beside him, protective and furious. He told us that, 6 months earlier, his Labrador retriever had disappeared from their yard. They searched for days. Just as they were beginning to give up, someone found the dog injured, dehydrated, and traumatized in a wooded ravine behind their neighborhood. The vet said the injuries were consistent with being pushed or thrown. At first it looked like a tragic accident. But then the boy said something that made Celeste sit forward. I saw her. I didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe I imagined it. But I saw her car. I swear I saw her car near the ravine. And she'd yelled at my dog before. Twice. Said he barked too loud. Said she'd take care of it if we didn't. The mother added, we reported it, but the officer said we didn't have evidence. And without evidence, it's her word against ours. Celeste inhaled slowly. This wasn't petty cruelty anymore. This was cruelty that bordered on something criminal. But none of this at all was enough to land her in prison. Not until the cemetery incident went viral. And then an unexpected witness came forward. A groundskeeper. His name was Jasper Mills. He was in his late 60s with hands rough like tree bark and a weathered certainty in his voice. He sat down in the conference room across from us, arms folded. I've been working at that cemetery 28 years, he started. And I've seen all kinds of disrespect, but never anything like what she did. And not just to your girl. My blood ran cold. He explained that Karen had visited the cemetery several times. Not for grief, not for mourning, but because she used the grounds as shortcuts, occasionally even driving through the unpaved pathways to avoid the morning traffic. At first he only warned her. Then he filed a complaint. She retaliated by accusing him of harassment. She even took a video of him performing routine groundskeeping and posted it saying he was violating landscape protocol and destroying burial sites. Then Jasper paused. His jaw tightened. Here's what broke me, he said. One time, she nearly drove over a grave that was mid-restoration. The soil was open. The coffin hadn't entirely settled. If she had driven those wheels 2 feet closer, she would have crushed the vault. I felt sick. He looked at me, eyes steady. She's dangerous. Not in the way that gets headlines right away, but in that quiet, selfish way that builds until someone gets seriously hurt. Celeste leaned back. With the evidence from the video, the public outrage, the previous reports, the dog incident, and Jasper's testimony, she knew what angle to take. Reckless endangerment of a burial site. Hate intimidation toward a grieving family. Harassment. Defamation. And the most serious charge, unlawful desecration of human remains. Even unintentional desecration is a severe crime in Washington state. And she had driven directly onto the grave. The DA picked up the case within a week. Karen, predictably, responded with fury. She made another video. This time she was red-faced, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The internet had turned against her. People had recognized her from previous incidents. And when she realized the case was moving to criminal court, she snapped like a rubber band pulled too tight. You people are insane, she screamed into her phone camera. I didn't do anything wrong. The father is exploiting his daughter's death for attention. The cemetery guy is lying. All these people want is to ruin me because I'm a strong woman who stands up for herself. Her eyes were wild. Her voice cracked. She ranted about conspiracies, about feminist persecution, about anti-suburban bias, about grief culture, about the media wanting to destroy her life. She even claimed that I had set up the situation by placing my daughter's grave in a badly designed location. When the video ended, Celeste looked at me grimly. This is going to trial, and it's going to be ugly. The pre-trial hearings were brutal. Karen's attorney argued that she was a victim of public hysteria and internet mob justice. They claimed parking on a grave was accidental and not malicious. They claimed her pushing me was self-defense. They claimed the videos were taken out of context. They claimed the witnesses were coordinated by online harassment groups. But then the prosecutors played the footage of her laughing about my daughter's death. The courtroom went silent. Even Karen seemed to realize she had crossed a line that could not be walked back. During one hearing, she tried to interrupt the judge, shouting that the entire process was biased and that she deserved sympathy because the public had ruined her life. The judge stared at her, unimpressed. "Ma'am, you are not helping your case." Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered with signs. Some were there for me. Some were there against her. The debates online turned vicious. Some said she was mentally ill. Others said she was the product of unchecked entitlement. Some defended her as a misunderstood woman. Others said prison wasn't enough. But the turning point came from someone unexpected. Her ex-husband. He contacted Celeste quietly. We met him in a private room behind the courthouse. He was tall, tired-looking, and carried a grief of his own. He didn't defend her. He didn't attack her. He simply told the truth. Their divorce 5 years earlier had involved restraining orders, emotional manipulation, and a year of repeated welfare checks requested by neighbors who heard shouting at all hours. He revealed she had a long documented history of uncontrolled rage, obsession with public perception, and dangerous impulsive behavior. But one detail hit the hardest. She once threatened to destroy their son's bicycle because he wouldn't ride it the right way. Her ex-husband said quietly, she believes rules don't apply to her, and she believes everyone else exists to accommodate her. I'm not surprised she parked on a grave. I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. Testimony piled. Evidence mounted. Public opinion hardened. Prosecutors built a case not just around the grave incident, but around the pattern of escalating behavior that showed she was a danger to the community. But even then, I never expected the sentence. I thought she might get probation. Maybe a year. Maybe 2 if the judge was having a particularly stern morning. Instead, the courtroom fell into a stunned hush when the judge spoke the words. 8 years. 8 years in state prison. The maximum sentence. Karen collapsed in her seat. Her attorney stood frozen. Reporters scribbled furiously. Somewhere behind me, someone gasped. The judge explained the reasoning clearly. A society is measured by how it treats its dead and how it protects its grieving. What you did was more than disrespect. It was cruelty. It was intentional disregard for human dignity. And your actions after the fact demonstrated no remorse, only malice. For the first time since the incident, I felt the air return to my lungs. Justice didn't bring Lily back, but it protected her memory. When they led Karen out in handcuffs, she looked at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief, as if she still thought she was the victim. I didn't look away, because grief had changed me, but justice had grounded me. Outside the courthouse, under the same kind of sunlight that had illuminated that terrible morning in the cemetery, I breathed in the cool air of Tacoma and felt something settle inside me. Not joy, not triumph, but a long overdue quiet. The quiet of knowing the world had finally said no to someone who had taken too much for too long. And somewhere beneath the maple tree, I hoped Lily knew that her father had stood up for her one last time. When the courthouse steps finally emptied and the news vans rolled away, the silence that followed felt impossibly vast. The kind of silence that sinks into your bones. It was strange how justice, after so many months of noise, could feel so quiet. As if the world had been shouting and suddenly decided to whisper. But the story didn't end with the sentence. Nothing ends neatly when grief has been ripped open, stitched closed, ripped open again, and then finally given space to breathe. In the days following the verdict, messages poured in from strangers across the country. Some shared their own stories of dealing with people like her neighbors, co-workers, relatives who treated the world as their personal stage. Others simply offered condolences, saying they saw my daughter's grave on the news and cried for a child they'd never met. And then came the letters reel, ink on paper letters from people who'd lost children. Parents who understood a kind of pain no one should ever have to articulate. They wrote about the empty bedrooms, the birthdays that now felt like anniversaries of absence, the small objects, hair ties, school projects, cereal bowls that felt like anchors to a life that had slipped away too soon. One letter stayed with me. It was from a father in Ohio who had lost his son to a drunk driver. He wrote, "Justice doesn't heal you. It steadies you. It gives you ground to stand on so you can carry the grief without falling through it." I kept that letter. But Rose, my ex-wife and Lily's mother, struggled more deeply. We had separated shortly after Lily's death, not because we didn't love each other, but because grief had reshaped us into people who didn't fit together anymore. She had moved to California for work and healing. We kept in touch, quietly, gently, never pushing too hard. When the verdict came out, she called me. I hadn't heard her voice that raw in a long time. She whispered, "Tell me it felt worth it." I took a long breath. I wish I could tell you it fixed everything. But it gave me something. Space. Strength. A boundary. She won't hurt anyone else for a long while. She let out a shaky breath. I needed to hear that. She flew to Tacoma a week later. We stood together under the maple tree, both of us trembling but trying to hide it from each other. She knelt beside Lily's grave like she always had, brushing away leaves, smoothing the soil, arranging the fresh sunflowers she'd brought. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I dreamed about her last night. She was laughing about worms again. I closed my eyes. Me too. For the first time in years, the ache between us wasn't sharp. It softened. It made room. We spent hours telling stories about Lily, stories we'd each forgotten, stories we'd never shared. The time she'd painted her sneakers with glitter glue because plain shoes are boring. The time she cried because she accidentally stepped on a snail. The time she said she wanted to be a scientist and an artist and a worm whisperer all at once. When the sun slipped behind the trees, Rose leaned back against the trunk of the maple. She looked tired, but not broken. She said quietly, "I saw the videos. I saw that woman, laughing. And I kept thinking, how does someone lose their humanity like that?" I didn't have an answer. Not one that would comfort her. But I remembered something Celeste had said during the trial preparation. She had looked at me and said, "People don't become monsters overnight. They become monsters in small permissions, in repeated absolutions, in the quiet moments where they choose themselves over everyone else." 1,000 choices build a monster. Karen had built herself, and now she would sit with the consequences. The weeks rolled into months. The media frenzy settled. Life moved in quieter patterns. I returned to work. Rose returned to California. Jasper, the groundskeeper, visited the grave more often than before, checking on the soil, tending the grass with a gentleness that made my throat tighten. But life has a strange way of offering you unexpected chapters after tragedy. One of those chapters came in the form of a public letter written by a woman named Trisha, longtime friend of Karen's who had cut ties years earlier. She wrote a heartfelt reflection, saying she had spent years excusing Karen's behavior because it was easier than confronting it. She wrote about defending her, covering for her, apologizing on her behalf. She said the trial forced her to see how enabling someone's cruelty only grows it. She wrote, "I should have spoken up years ago. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe she wouldn't have hurt so many people. I'm sorry I didn't have the strength then. I'm trying to have it now." Her letter went viral, not because it defended Karen, but because it held a mirror to everyone who had let her behavior slide. The comment sections were full of people recounting their own experiences with Karens in their communities. People who had looked the other way. People who'd said, "It's not worth getting involved." People who had finally realized silence can be a kind of permission. And yet, one comment stood out among thousands. It read, "Some people need consequences to become human again." That single sentence lingered with me. But months later, something unexpected happened. The prison sent me a letter, a formal notice, informing me that the inmate, HOA Karen Tran, had requested to send me correspondence. They were legally required to ask for my consent before allowing it. For a long time, I sat with the letter in my lap, staring at the crisp edges. A part of me wanted to refuse. Another part wanted, against my better judgment, to know what she could possibly say after everything. Anger told me to shred it. Curiosity told me to wait. Grief told me to breathe. In the end, I checked the box that allowed the prison to release her letter to me. It arrived 2 weeks later. A single page, handwritten. Not an apology. Not exactly. But something strange. And human. She wrote about growing up in a home where weakness was punished, where kindness was mocked, where perfection was demanded and mistakes were weapons. She wrote about the marriages she'd destroyed, the friendships she'd drained, the jobs she'd lost. She wrote that prison wasn't what broke her, silence was. She wrote, "When the world finally stopped listening to me, I had to listen to myself. And I didn't like what I heard." Toward the end, she added, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. But I'm sorry you lost your daughter. And I'm sorry I added more pain to something already unbearable. I sat there for a long time, feeling something heavy loosen inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the letter folded one sharp edge of anger into something less jagged. I didn't write back. I didn't shred it either. I kept it in a drawer. Life continued with soft, steady steps. A year after the sentencing, the cemetery invited families to participate in a tradition they called the Renewal Walk. It was a quiet event with lanterns, flowers, and music played by local volunteers. I attended alone at first. Then Jasper joined me. Then Rose visited again and stood beside me, shoulder brushing mine. When we reached Lily's grave, a warm breeze rustled the leaves of the maple tree. Sunlight filtered through the branches like tiny blessings. Children ran between markers laughing gently, supervised by parents who guided them with reverence. I knelt down, placing a fresh lavender bouquet on the grass. And for the first time since the day she died, I didn't feel only loss. I felt presence, love, memory that didn't hurt to hold. Months later, I found myself volunteering at a support group for grieving parents. It wasn't something I planned. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing. But healing has a way of asking you to give back once you've regained your footing. One evening, after a meeting, a woman approached me. Her son had died by suicide. She had come for the first time, eyes swollen, voice shaking. She asked me, "How do you know when it gets better?" I paused. I wanted to give her something true, something real, something that didn't pretend grief was a wound that healed cleanly. So I told her, it doesn't get better, but it gets gentler. And it gets lighter to carry when you let other people help you hold it. She nodded slowly, and I saw something soften in her expression, the smallest shift toward hope. Another unexpected chapter arrived the following spring when the city announced plans for a new memorial garden dedicated to children who passed too soon. They wanted my input on the design. They wanted Lily's story to help shape the project. I said yes. The garden opened a year later. Rose flew in. So did friends. Even Celeste came. Families gathered, sharing stories, tears, laughter that didn't feel guilty anymore. The memorial plaque bore dozens of children's names, each one representing a life cut short but never forgotten. When they asked me to speak, I hesitated. Public speaking was never my strength. But I found myself walking to the microphone anyway. I told them about loss, about grief that lived in my chest like a weight, about anger that nearly consumed me, about a woman whose cruelty forced my grief into the public eye. But I also told them about justice, about community, about the kindness of strangers, about the letters, the stories, the healing that followed. And I ended with this: we are not defined by what was taken from us. We are defined by what we do with the space that remains. And in that space, I choose memory, not anger, love, not bitterness, and hope for every family that stands where I once stood. There were tears. There was silence. There was something like peace. When the ceremony ended, I walked to the maple tree one last time. I touched its bark. I whispered Lily's name. And I felt finally, truly, that the world had shifted into a place where I could keep living without feeling like I was leaving her behind. Justice had not been the end of the story. Grief wasn't the end either. The end was this: a father standing in sunlight, a child's memory held with gentleness, a world that had learned just to let Lido be kinder. And in that small, quiet space, my daughter lived on. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.